I got the ad. Here I am thinking that I'm here on time. I've got everything in the right spot, but I have the chat playing in another window. So I guess I get an ad with YouTube as well. Anyways, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm afraid Kendall's not here tonight. She had something that she had to take care of, and it was quite urgent. So I am here on my own. And I am so happy to see Sheila from my cruise already in the chat. And I see Nancy Cox from my quilt crew as well, but so many people already here from all over the world. Welcome. Now, I did ask for some questions earlier today on Facebook and on Instagram, and I did take a screenshot of them about an hour ago. So I'm going to start with those questions on this chat. So I guess the first one was, did I enjoy the Panama cruise? It was 16 days. We started in Fort Lauderdale, and we started off with a shop hop. It was absolutely wonderful. We got to meet each other, and we went to. We started. Our first place was. This was Cynthia's Fine Fabrics, and Cynthia and her crew were so amazing. They were so welcoming, so gracious. They kept us hydrated, kept us fed as we took our time and found our fabric. And then we went over to Once Upon a Quilt, and this is Lisa's gang, and they were also just amazing. And it was a great time for us to all talk and get to know one another as we were finding out everybody's particular taste as they were buying fabric and getting ready for the cruise. And then um, we had an absolutely fantastic 2 weeks together. We had 8 sew days together, and I am so proud of this bunch of quilters. Here we are standing in the middle of the celebrity millennium, and this is the whole crew. And in the back row, you can see uh, John and Ray on the two sides. They were our tour guides, and the other gentleman and the woman in the middle, Janine. Janine especially was our sewing machine technician. So uh, it was quite the cruise. We went to 5 different countries, but the ship itself, the accommodations and the food and everything was just amazing. And if it was possible, when we were filling in our form, that we could have checked the box for calm seas, I don't think the seas could have been softer. They were just wonderful. I think we had maybe 5 minutes of rain the whole time. Um, yeah, it was just a uh, uh, fantastic trip. So I see we've got people from all over. A couple of fellow Canadians from California, some people from Kansas, Indiana. I'm looking for a person. Yep, they've shown up. Hi, Julianne from Kansas City. Julianne was also on the cruise with her. She came along with one of her best friends, Robin, and it was so fun to see two friends uh, just having a great time. Just having a great time. So, uh, yeah. So, if anybody is, I think the next question on my list was, uh, do I have any plans for next year? And the truth is, yes, we've got a trip planned for Ireland, Iceland, and Scotland. It is departing on June 27th for 11 nights. It starts in London, England, or actually, it starts in Southampton. And I'm just going to dump the contact information into the chat below, and you can check them out. There'll be more information, obviously, on my channel. We're just getting started now. But my very next cruise is in October, and it is in Hawaii. We are going, if you saw Karen's Quilt Circle interview with Sissy Sarow, she's a third generation Hawaiian quilter. She is going to teach us, she and her sister are going to teach us how to Hawaiian quilt. So the class is before the cruise, as there's no sea days except for the very last day, and the last class will be on that final day. So I hope, oh, we got Lynn Jones from the cruise too there. Glad to see you, Lynn. Now, Lynn was also with me in Alaska. So that was great. So I'm also just going to, these two stores in Florida were wonderful, and they were part of the Shop Hop. But if you're ever in Fort Lauderdale and you have to, whether you're getting on a cruise or you're just looking for something to do, these two stores are worth checking out. They were really nice, and I've just put their contact information in the link as well. We have Enya from Bavaria. Thank you for showing up. Boy, that's far. We actually had somebody on the cruise from Germany. Of course, we had Angie and her mom from Australia, and there were two other Canadians on board with me, Barb from Hamilton and Jeanette from Wasaga Beach, and then the rest were Americans, and they were from all over. We did have a pocket from Washington State, but lots of lovely people from all over, and a lot of husbands and partners too, so that was nice to see. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for different questions here. So somebody has asked me about my adding machine tape crumb strips. Have I started making my quilt? It's on my list. I should be working on it before the end of June. I've got a couple of things that I've got a whole list of projects I want to get through before the end of the summer, and that is definitely on the list of things that I want to take care of. So, yeah. Lottie Bursel, I think is her name, has asked me if I've done anything about interfacing scraps. I've done just a touch on it, only the fusible ones where you can use them for raw edge applique. Otherwise, I don't use a lot of interfacing, so I don't have a lot of I don't have a lot of scraps that I need to deal with. So Zoe Thingy has asked, what are my plans around the cruise at Southampton, UK? So when you go on the cruise, you are able to participate in the Shop Hop beforehand. We're going to be in London. There's going to be all sorts of, we found doing a Shop Hop beforehand really helpful. So I'm thinking there may be some activities in London we can do. Definitely Joe Andrews from Haptic and Hue has talked about all sorts of textile tours that you can do within the city of London and beyond. If you're a member of my quilt crew, I might try and get together a meetup beforehand. But there'll be more details in the future. That's a year away. I still have lots of things that I need to get through before I get to that. Brigitte Kirkpatrick has asked, how do you dispose of used blades, needles, and pins? There's also the question of, do blade sharpeners really work? Now, I've answered the question about blade sharpeners and do they work many times. And the answer is yes, but you need to know how to use them properly for them to work. There's a lot of people that say that they don't work, but they just haven't read the instructions and they don't understand how sharpening works. So yes, they do work, but make the effort to learn how to do it. I think it was Karen's, the Quilt Coach episode 3 or 4, I think I showed how you actually do it. And how do you dispose of used blades, needles, and pins? Well, beside my sewing table, I normally have an old pill container, and that's where I dump any dull needles and pins. I mean, if it's catching on anything, it immediately goes into that thing. goes into the container. I don't try to save it at all. While we were on the cruise, somebody had brought a plastic container. It's actually for baking soda, and with a large screw lid on it. And that's where we put all our old blades. And when I filled those things, I have my studio is in an industrial area, and there are metal collectors coming around all the time, and I just hand it off to them. But most municipalities have a recycling program for metals as well. So just find out how they dispose of it. There's often a day of the year where, at least here in Toronto, there's a day where they set up shop at a school or in a big parking lot somewhere where you can dump off multiple different types of garbage and just save it for there. You don't need to probably do it more than once a year. So let me just go through some of these new comments and just see whether I can find some questions here. Mine, Don Snyder has asked, how about showing quilt as you go steps? My next Stash Buster quilt is going to be a quilt as you go. So keep your eye out for that one. Jessica Reinschmidt from Chicago. I was thinking of you, Jessica, when we arrived in LAX because Alaskan Airlines was right next door and we were on a 737. So, but it was Saturday. I presumed you were home in Chicago. Birgit's here from New Zealand. Okay, I'm looking for some questions here. Marianne Geiger, do you have a technique for matching points when piecing? Well, it has to do with math. And there's nesting seams, and I definitely have a technique, but unfortunately, you can't explain it very well in a Q&A. It's one of those things where you have to show. So just be sure that your seam allowance is accurate and try and nest your seams whenever you can. Stark Raven Wild has says you've got to go to Liberty of London. Yes, we must visit the mothership when we are in London. Tammy Wright has said she is new to English paper piecing. How do you keep the fabric from moving when hand basting? Does it just come with practice? Well, part of it is practice and part of it is technique. Part of it is that we're clenching so hard when we're holding those pieces that they begin to shift from each other. The other thing is maybe your stitches are a little bit big, and that's making one side of your fabric advance a little bit faster than the other. You might try and keep them smaller. There is a product called Sew Tights. I showed the big ones in my video, my QuiltCon haul, but they're small. I don't have them here, but they have small ones. They have big ones. They have lightweight ones for people that suffer from arthritis so that they're not so hard to take off. And they've got heavy duty ones for people that are putting, 5 layers of interfacing and padding and everything when they're doing a bag. But these I have found, it took me a long time before I started using them, but I finally broke down, grabbed them, and I'm wondering why I never got them earlier, because they do keep your pieces together nice and securely, and they do not seem to shift as much. I was using clips before, and I was just using my hands, but those are the things that I use to keep them from slipping beside. Will I be putting the trip to Europe in with your travel agent? Yes, we will be booking through RGE Travels. Barbara is here. Barbara was one of our best students on the cruise. She really worked hard, and I know she was a little out of her comfort zone at times, but she certainly has the results to show for it. Lizzie Knight has asked, what ship are you going on for the cruise? It's not the Millennium. The Millennium was the one I was on for the last two. This is the Equinox class, and I do not know the particular ship, but it's a bigger ship and it's supposed to be a little bit more luxurious than the Millennium class. Stephanie Boron's here from Idaho. We had a person on the cruise from Idaho. I use, Jerry Bray says she uses tuna cans for used blades. Just the right size. Yes, that's perfect. Nice and round. That's a good idea. Cindy has also mentioned that you can get free sharps container from a pharmacy. I know years ago when I was a guide leader, we would often collect old Javix containers and fabric softener containers, and we would donate them to hospitals, and they use that for all their used needles. But again, as long as it's secure and it's out of the way, try and upcycle what you can. Another person says baby food jars are a good use for used blades. Here we go. Let me grab another question from here. Where do my hexies go? Sam Smith asked me, where do my hexies go? In some jar videos, the jar is full, and others that it's empty. Well, I have been collecting them. I now have 2 bags full of hexies, and I'm just finishing off a really big English paper piecing project. And when that is done, I'm going to make a decision whether I'm going to start doing an embroidery project that I've had from Sue Spargo, or I'm going to start doing something with those hexies. So that's when I'll know what I'm going to do with them. Some projects are 5-year projects, some projects are 10-year projects. So Donna Hammond has asked, she picked up a pattern and said you should use a scant 1/4 inch seam. Exactly how do I get that? Can I use the stacked masking tape trick? So a lot of people default to this scant 1/4 inch because most people don't want to waste any time figuring out where the accuracy is. It's often a very good default. It's fast and easy. If your quilt is simple and the pattern is simple, but scant 1/4 inch means that you are sewing. There's the sew line at the 1/4 inch line, and a scant 1/4 inch is 1 to 2 needle widths inside that. That is what a scant 1/4 inch. When people are talking about scant, they're talking about 1 to 2 needle sizes in from that line. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work when you're working with compound blocks. So that usually means like there's an HST and maybe a 4-patch and maybe a flying geese inside a bigger block. And the scant 1/4 inch technique breaks down when it would be fine for a quilt like this, a scant 1/4 inch, but when you get into those bigger blocks, or I call them compound blocks, the scant 1/4 inch breaks down because it's all about math, and you need that accuracy for all those smaller blocks to fit together square. So use my method of how to sew. I'm pretty sure I had it either in how to sew straight or how to make the perfect HST. Always make a practice piece. I don't do it daily, but I do it every time I start to work on a different project, or because the fabric folds differently. Fabric comes in different thicknesses, and you just want to nail that every single time. So I use a wedge of masking tape and I line it up, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to get it on the first try, but most of the time it takes me 2 to 3 tries. Annette Dombrowski would like to know what was my first English paper piecing quilt was. She's doing Tula Pink Queen of Diamonds block of the month. What suggestions do you have for a beginner? Well, with any beginner, try not to run. There's a good saying I heard a couple of years ago, don't run faster than your shoes. So don't start off your first block. If you're a brand new beginner, do not start off your first block trying fussy cutting on top of uh, design matching on top of 15 different colors in your block. You want to take it slow, practice on, you may even do a practice block before you do your good stuff because you may not want to cut into your good Tula Pink fabrics to start off with. So practice. Putting together English paper piecing sometimes is so easy, and then sometimes it can be very difficult. I've just finished I called it my bathing cap, but it was a ball that I made. And as you're trying to fit everything together, you've got to be able to fold over that fabric nice and crispy, crisply, and trying to figure out how things line up. That is so much fun. You're going to have such a good time. It is a great pattern, and fussy cutting is really fun. But start off just trying to get the technique of rolling over your papers and getting everything to fit together nicely, getting those points and everything to line up. Just looking. And Rankin agrees with me that sew tights are awesome. Laura T has asked, how can you take a 12-inch block and make it a 6-inch block? Would you ever consider making a video to instruct us? I'm not going to make a video, but it's part of a course that I have that I'm working on. I have 3 courses that I'm working on that I'm prioritizing for the next quarter, and it will be part of that. Lim Walker has asked, I've seen a jelly roll strip quilt with a multi-skinny strip border. I'd like to try it on my next quilt, maybe 1 inch wide, but I can't find any instructions on it anywhere. Any tips? Well, if you're working with jelly rolls, you're going to have some offcuts of that you can make that skinny strip border. So a half of a jelly roll is 1.25 inches, and that finishes at 7/8 of an inch. 7/8, not 7/8. It's 3/4 of an inch. I had 75 in my mind. That's why it came out wrong. So it finishes at 3/4. So if you're wanting to utilize your jelly rolls for that, that's what your border will be. But you want to practice sewing straight. You want to be sure to have a ledge or some way of getting those really nice straight seams. They're a little bit more forgiving in bigger blocks, but when things are really narrow like that, little imperfections show so much more. So practice sewing, maybe even just on some offcuts, and it's a nice border to have. You might consider doing it with piano keys instead of doing long strips, and that way it'll be easier to execute. Maria Angelis has asked, is the cruise to Hawaii only for you, or are you going to publish it so the ones that want to go can go? Yes. I'm going to have it live on my channel, on my website next week. Roxy Wood has asked me, do you ever use the red glasses to see the value, and do they work? So the red glasses and the green glasses is an older technique for seeing value. We don't really need it so much anymore because we are all armed with a cell phone that takes photos, and we can just simply change it to the black and white setting. So what the red light used to be, so blue sat on one end of the value scale, and yellow sits on the other end of value for colors that are all of the same hue. I should say colors that are all of the same intensity, same saturation. And red and green are almost equal. So when you put the red glass over top of your fabric, it absorbs all the red in it, and you can see the range in color. And there's another one similarly that you can do with green that takes the green out of it, and you can see that range in value. But the problem is that green and red are very similar in value, and I actually made that mistake on the cruise. I made all these flying geese. I knew it going in that I was going to get myself in trouble, but I thought the pattern within the fabric was going to be strong enough to make that distinction, but they are just the same value. I did all that work, and the piecing just looks like one great big piece. You cannot see the differentiation in when you take the light away, when you look at it through monochrome, it just looks like one great big piece. So be careful of that. I find the black and white filter a lot more accurate. What fabric is good for sewing garden flags? I would suggest anything. I would suggest a polyester, because if you're leaving it out and it's going to get wet, you want something that's going to be a little bit. You want a fabric that you can see from both sides. The problem with quilting cotton is printed just on one side, so that's not a good candidate. Jacqueline is here from Perth, Australia. Penny Nicole has, nope, that's not a question. She's just a comment. Linda Dykeman, she is from Keswick Ridge, New Brunswick. Do you have a formula or an easy way to figure out the size of a square to cut triangles for the outside corners or fill-ins to make a quilt square? So what she's talking about is when you have blocks and you turn them on point, you have little spots on the edges of your quilt that need to be filled in, and you need the corners to fill in. They're called set-in triangles. And the triangles in the corners are HSTs, and the other ones are quarter square triangles. And it's really important that you cut your fabric so that the bias is not on the edge. Rather, the grain is on the corners so that your quilt does not stretch. Your quilt top does not stretch while you're quilting it. And I'm pretty sure that I showed you how to do that in my video, Quilt Coach number 1. I'm pretty sure the graphic is there. If it's not there, it's in Quilt Coach number 2. And the math for HSTs is your finished size. You want to cut a square that's your finished size plus 7/8. And for the quarter square triangles, the math is adding 1.5. So, do I have my... So when I'm talking about the 2, just going to grab a pen. So an HST is this one, and a quarter square triangle you cut like that. So this is QST, and that's 1.5 inches larger than the finished size. And this one's 7/8 inches, and this is an HST. Half square triangle, quarter square triangle. Okay. What's this question? Carol Rears Cam has asked, can you do a video on quilting on your long arm? I recently got one and could use some inspiration getting started. I'm mostly afraid to screw up my first quilt. Well, that I felt that way too. I haven't made a video on quilting on my long arm because I am not a proficient at long arming. I'm getting better. I am getting better. Let me show you a couple of pictures of the maple and eucalyptus that I was busy making the night before. I was quilting through the night. So, I'm getting better at free motion. I'm getting um, I'm getting better at uh, just choosing a pattern and going for it. But I think one of the things that you've got to remember, I had Angela Walters speaking to me all through the night while I was finishing this off. There's probably about 30 hours in making this quilt, but the last pit I was finishing off that night. But her advice is always done is better than perfect. Just quilt it evenly. It doesn't matter whether your points line up or things like that. People will notice a vacuum or a negative space more quickly than if it's all done evenly. And her voice is just so encouraging in the back of my mind while I was doing it. So you just have to keep practicing. Make a couple of ugly quilts, or like from my Stash Buster series, make something simple. Do a lot of I became much better practicing on baby quilts that I made for a local charity. And I just keep trying and I kept trying. I have gone through a period when I did a lot of pantographs, and I found a lot of zen in those, um, and that they were quite rewarding. But unfortunately, I couldn't do that on my maple and eucalyptus quilt. I had to do something much more custom. Um, so don't I understand the fear. The fear is real, and possibly it is a reality. So practice on, do some whole cloth quilting if you must. Just take some ugly fabric and practice. Just practice. My first practice piece, I just bound and made into a dog bed, like a dog blanket, and it sits in the back of my car. And I'm sure you know lots of people that can use dog blankets. Sue Green Gregerstein has asked, she loves the look of modern quilts. How do you get started making them? Well, I'm not quite sure which style of modern quilts that you're talking about, but you just start. Uh, the great thing about modern quilts is you can leave some of the rules at the door, but not all modern quilts are busy and chaotic and wonky. Some of them are very precise and very exact. There's a lot of interpretation of modern. Um, One way is just to make a traditional quilt and just choose brighter palettes and maybe start fussy cutting or leaving out blocks and creating negative space with them. So there's lots of different ways to get into modern quilting. Helen Damaris has asked me, have I ever made a one block wonder kaleidoscope quilt or a 4-patch or something? I think she's talking about trying to get um, that repeating pattern from the one block wonder. And yes, I did. My friend Susan introduced me to the technique, and she and our other friend Susan spent a weekend at her place, and we made one block wonders. Uh, you My advice when making a one block wonder is choosing a fabric with some contrast in it. I made the mistake of choosing a fabric that, though I really liked the colors in it, it was the saturation that I liked, it didn't have a lot of contrast. Uh, so even if, like, let's say you just like blues and you don't want a busy multicolored quilt, still choose a blue fabric that has very light colors and very dark versions of the blue in your quilt. And that way, as you cut up your pieces and you're getting the kaleidoscope effect, that contrast is what's going to bring out the magic. Do I have a foundation paper piece video? I do not specifically have a video on foundation paper piecing. It is part of my very first video that I ever made on the economy block, where I showed you how to do it. I actually showed you two different ways, one with paper and one with freezer paper, but I have not done one since then. I do have a video planned on how you make large scale foundation paper piecing coming up. But I'll probably have a regular one right beforehand, just so the big scale one makes more sense. Let's just see. So Yarn, I believe it's Sheila, has asked, best way to hang small wall quilts as a beginner. This is part of my second dollar store hacks. I use command strips. I just put one part of the Velcro on the back of the quilt, and I put command strips on the wall. Melissa Moore is here for the first time. She says, do you ever find yourselves with quilter's block, needing inspiration and motivation to get back in the sewing room? Well, quilter's block is real. It could be that you are working on something that you don't want to work on anymore. It's not filling you in some way. It could be that you've got to the particular point of the quilt that doesn't necessarily lead to your strengths, or you could be working with colors that you no longer like, or you could be making it for someone that you no longer want to give it to. There are a number of reasons for quilter's block while you're making a quilt. But you can't ignore other factors in your life. You need a number of skills when you come to the table for quilting. It could be a very hard shift from what you're doing during the day, and you could just be burning out that kind of mental energy with other things that are going on in your life. So when I get into that state, I'm actually doing a video on rebooting, because you can have it in multiple different times. You can have it when there's trauma in your life. You can have it when you've just been doing too much. You can have it when you break up with someone. And you can even have it when you finish a big project. You know, how do you get started on another one? So, but my very first advice is always just to be sure you're getting enough sleep. Whether you're looking after your health, are you drinking enough? I hate to say it, but often for me, when I'm having those type of mental blocks, it's because I'm not drinking enough water. And the other thing is to declutter, because there can be, and I'm not just talking about decluttering your space, I'm talking about decluttering your to-do list. You know, there's a lot of things that can be on that to-do list that are not important, that are just taking up space in your head. You've got it on a list of things to do, and it's just not important. You can either delegate it or just take it off. And that's what can help you with your quilter's block. Now, one other thing I recommend highly is not everything has to lead to a quilt. You can get into your fabric, you can get into your stuff, and just play with it. Bring it out, sort it, shake it up, just do all sorts of fun things with it. Try, does this work with that? Does this work with that? Does this work with that? And that can bring you happiness. It doesn't necessarily have to lead to a quilt. It doesn't mean that you start a project the next day, but it will bring you joy, because these are the fabrics that you bought because you wanted them. So have fun. Now, I'm just looking at the clock. I have been talking for an hour and a half. Is it an hour? No. Sorry, we started at 6:30. I thought, have I been at this for over an hour? Dorothy Higham has asked, you use a washing product called Synthropol. Did you notice any change in your fabric? I do not. I am not a dyer. I do not get in, for whatever reason, dyeing does not thrill me, or the idea of dyeing does not thrill me. I love the results of it. I love people that do the ice dyeing, and I've been following someone just recently who's just been doing some amazing tie dyeing, but that's not me. And I don't know whether it's because I don't want to get my hands wet, or I don't want to play with all those liquids, or I just don't want another fussy thing in my space, but dyeing is not for me. August Ace has asked, what is your oldest work in progress that you're still excited about finishing? I have my new hexagon Millefiore that's just blocks away from being finished. This has been a 6-year project. It's an English paper piecing. It's based on a pattern um, by Katia Marek, and I am so excited to finish this one. I learned so much making this fabric, whether it be about English paper piecing, but mostly about color and pattern and how we use it. I've incorporated so many uh, tips and techniques that I've learned into other parts of my quilting making it. And I want to make another one. Now I know all the mistakes that I've made, the ways that you can improve. I'm very anxious to get another one going. Marcia Adams says, I'm wanting to start ironing my fabric in blocks with starch. I have heard you mention Best Press. Does it have starch in it? I don't know. I don't know Best Press. I do know Flatter, and Flatter is a starch alternative product, and I enjoy using that. But for starch, you want to use it before you cut your fabric. You want to starch your fabric. What starch is scaffolding. It secures the fibers so that they are in place. If you start using starch after you make your blocks, there is an issue of shrinkage involved. Um, so when you are just before you're starting, uh, has anybody seen Kimberly Jolly? Because she has a starch room in her house where she starches her fabric. So that's a full scale job. I only use starch on blocks where I'm cutting on the bias because that's what I'm using it for. I find the grain, I, I just have a technique or my practice just does not involve manipulating or overworking um, squares and rectangles. So I don't have a problem with stretching on that. Use a good ironing technique, starch before you cut, and you should be fine. Uh, Sorry. How's my quilt coat coming along? Thanks for asking. It has not been coming along, but on the cruise, there was a woman by the name of Lisa Pettibone, and she had an absolutely amazing quilt coat, which was kind of along the lines, not quite, but somewhat along the lines of what I was hoping to do. And she hadn't put sleeves on it, and I thought it looked fabulous on her. And I think that's one of the problems that I've had is that I don't necessarily want to make a quilt coat. I want to make a quilt vest, a long quilt vest, because that's just much more my style. And now that I've made that decision, I'm going to start working on it. What do you, Anne Blackburn has asked, what do you do with leftover pieces of batting? I do lots of different things. I've got a whole video on what I do with leftover batting. The big pieces I put together as we call it Franken batting. I just do a running stitch along it or a zigzag, and I piece it together, and I'll make quilts with it. So I have a particular technique that I use. So look for that video on what to do with batting scraps. The other pieces I will save for like 20-inch squares, I'll save for pillows. 12-inch squares, I'll save for quilt as you go blocks. Smaller, I have a stack of pieces that I use for postcards, and the rest of it I just spaghetti it up and I use it for batting, for stuffing. And I just used a whole pile of it yesterday, finishing off a quilted ball. Somebody here, Anne McGuire's here from Ireland. Teresa Alexander says she has severe arthritis in my hands, so she does a lot of quilt on the go. Any thoughts of maneuvering large quilts with a domestic machine? So with quilt as you go, and I understand the pain that arthritis brings, that's a good compromise. And think of working in strips so that you don't have to worry about any of the weight on this other side of your of your machine, and you don't have to manhandle things. Um, and get some tables and chairs to support the weight of the quilt on this side. Uh, I have a person in my quilt crew, Valerie Lapointe, who made an interesting um, contraption out of piping, plastic piping, PVC piping, which helped hold the weight of her quilt while she was quilting as you go. So there's lots of different resources online for things like that. So take a look into it. Patricia Gazzi has asked, can I do a video on a scant 1/4 inch seam? I've already talked about the scant 1/4 inch seam at the beginning of this Q&A, so take a look there. Ooh, any pointers on how to incorporate 100-year-old lace onto a heirloom quilt? Ooh, I do not have a lot of skills in restoration, but definitely do it by hand. I would not do it by sewing machine. I think that would be too rough on it. So, but there are lots of people that do restore older quilts. So take a look at that. So there's lots of different advice in the chat about starch, making your own, different types. Barbara has mentioned Acorn products. They have a spray, a setting spray that you use at the end, which is lovely. You don't press, you just spray and it sets. Carol Doyle has asked, Karen, I'm so glad you did, but why did you start Just Get It Done Quilts? Well, I think I'm like a lot of people that they started quilting, they really enjoyed it, and they wanted to know how to do more of it, how to get part of the whole quilting world. And I explored a couple of different ways. And then I accidentally fell into YouTube. I volunteered to make a how-to video for my guild for a guild challenge. I overpromised 3 different ways, 3 different sizes. That's that economy block video. But after making it, and it took me a long time because Jenny Doan can make it look super easy, and I knew within the first 5 minutes I was in deep trouble, but I persevered, and after 3 weeks I had that video. But then I learned so many skills, I thought I would do it again. So I did it for the next challenge video. And then I thought, how do I make this? How do I find my how do I find my way into making a YouTube channel? So I did the research. I pulled out my life experience and I threw it at a YouTube channel, and you like it. So I'm very honored. I have, I'm not sure if Becky is here from So Becca, but she has asked me to do a how to YouTube video course. So she's kind of talked me into it, and we may tag it along to QuiltCon next year. So see what we do. Stay tuned if you're interested. Jessica Reinschmidt has asked, any reason not to piece with your walking foot? I keep my walking foot on my sewing machine so much. I love my walking foot. There's times when I want that edge and I'll take it off and go back to my 1/4 inch foot. And I do have a differential feed on my Berninas, so that's sort of a walking foot as well. But there's something about that big size. There's lots of measurements on that walking foot too. You've got a measurement at a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch. There's a depth measurement, so I use it definitely for my binding. And if you are a Bernina person and you are in Canada, I just got a note today from Bernina that their walking foot is 25% off at their dealers this month. So grab this coupon and get to your dealer to get one. I have only one and I need a second one for my other machine. So I think I'll be taking them up on that too. To be able to trim up pieces to be accurate, how much extra should you add to the fabric? 0. The trick is to sew straight, cut accurately, and use a really good ironing technique. Now, if you are just sewing squares and rectangles, it really doesn't matter. The trick is, again, when you're talking about those compound blocks and trying to get it all to fit together. So try and practice not adding anything, but making sure you do a practice piece to ensure that your 1/4 inch seam is accurate. Then when you iron, don't swish. Make sure you press properly. I have a video on all these 3 things, and it is the foundation of good piecing. Joyce Whaley has asked, I have the pattern for the quilt that I made for myself. I believe she's talking about the Alente, it's Portuguese, I don't know how to pronounce it, Alentejana quilt, and that's by Ships and Violins. I don't have the name of it, there it is, but I'm wondering how you went about getting started. Your colors are so different from the pattern. Well, I think color is my strong suit when I approach any quilt to begin with, and I am always just going for it. But the trick was to combine those fabrics together. There were several different fabric designs that, though that they were different, they were very similar in value. So I grouped them together in value so that when I had to substitute with another fabric, because one fabric I didn't have enough for that section, it reads to the eye that it's the same. So there's a couple of places where I didn't pull it off as well as I wanted it to, but that was also the limitation of the fabric that I had. It wasn't necessarily that I made a mistake, I just didn't have any better choices to make. But I'll tell you, I really do love the results. Really enjoyed it. So it was complicated. It was a brain puzzle. It was, I had to read the whole pattern, understand how it came together, and then I had to take a blow up of the final one, the final layout, because the instructions are quite good. And then I had to work backwards. And I just threw out the piece of paper. Is that here or did I have it at home? It was a huge scratch sheet of numbers, trying to work it backwards and forwards. And there's some days I was better at it than others, but it was a brain puzzle. But I knew that going in. I knew that that was the challenge, and it just thrilled me having that kind of mental challenge. So, and because they were all from the same collection, I knew the fabrics would work together. Like the ultimate way the quilt came together, that was a no-brainer because they're all from the same line. They're already coordinating. So it was just the math of finding the similar values. Beth Douglas says, I sent you a question on thread weights. Is this something that you really need to pay attention to? If you are quilting fabric, just have a 50 weight thread. That's all you need to worry about. Thread weights come into play when you are working on heavier fabrics, or you're working on lighter fabrics, or you're trying a different technique. If you're doing embroidery, there's a different type of thread that works best for embroidery. When I'm doing English paper piecing, I use a fine polyester thread. Polyesters are stronger than cotton, so you can go down in weight. Sometimes weight has its place. I did a video. I showed, this was a technique that I did. I'm going to hear clunk. Just rolled something off. This is a technique that I did using 12 weight thread. And you can see it because it's 12 weight. But if you are just piecing, you are wanting to use a 50 weight thread. Georgina Yardley says, how do you get to the finish line of a king size quilt? You put on a timer, and every day you work for 30 minutes at it, and eventually you will get to the finish line. Ask me how I know. DR's on the similar line. How do you convince yourself to complete a quilting step that you do not enjoy doing? What strategies do you use? Well, there's two different ways. One is the strategy that I just talked about. Use a 30-minute timer, and that's all. The trick is to tell yourself that's all you need to do. Okay, so in that block of time, you only need to do 30 minutes. And if that is too much, turn your timer down to 15 minutes and do it for 15 minutes. The thing is, a step that you don't want to do is something that's not leading to your mental strengths for whatever reason, whether it be spatial, it be color, there's just could be a fine motor skill issue, it could be a math issue, there can be all different reasons why you stumble. And you might have, a lifelong challenge attached to it. If you're colorblind or something like that, or we now call it color deficient, there's all different reasons why you can stumble. So try and work yourself through it with a timer. Now, I make all sorts of different hacks. These are hacks for me to get around steps that I don't like doing. And there are thousands of people out there with amazing hacks that they've used to make a step faster. Or for me, I don't like fussy things. So I'm always trying to figure out how can we streamline things? How can we get the same results, but doing it differently? But the other thing is some things are just going to be impossible for you, or really challenging, or really emotional. And grab a friend and do it either together, or maybe you do a trade-off. Maybe that friend has a step that they don't like doing. Maybe they don't like binding, and they'll do something for you in return. So friends are amazing to help you get through those tough spots. They just hold you up even when you have things that go a little wonky. They can give you that encouragement saying, that mistake's not going to matter when you put the quilt together, and just help lift you. So those are the strategies I would use. Now, I know there's a lot of people that quilt on their own. They've never been to a guild. They don't have that Stitch in chat support. And I really encourage you to find that community, whether it be online. There are all different platforms that you can find them on, from Reddit to Facebook to Instagram. Form friendships, meet in person or meet on Zooms. Find your tribe, because it'll make a big difference in the long run. And on our cruise, we had a couple of people that had been quilting all by themselves, and they could not believe how supportive those people were and how they helped them make those hard decisions. What color should this be? Does this fabric work? I don't know. This block doesn't look good, and helping them support get you through the tough times. So I think I am at the end of the questions, and I just thank you all so much. I just love the way you all supported each other with your questions. Ones that I couldn't answer, you were in there like a house on fire, helping everyone. It's just amazing to me that everybody here is from all over the world, but we all contribute. So it doesn't matter whether you're from New Zealand or the UK or from the US or Canada, you all are brothers and sisters in quilting. So before we go, I just want to remind you that Where am I here? I know I had something here I wanted to show you. If you missed it before I went to QuiltCon, before I went to Panama, I had a video on my QuiltCon haul. These were objects that came home or I had shipped to me from QuiltCon. Part of that was the sew-type magnets. Some of that was pre-made binding. There you see my, what is this? What thread is this called? Is this called spaghetti? Yeah, this is spaghetti thread. And then, of course, my lovely, beautiful sewing caddy. Then we had, before that, this is the video that we were talking about. This is the quilt that I made from the Lentejana quilt. When I was making the video, I must have practiced saying that word 1,000 times, and now I'm out of practice. And then the one previous to that was how to sew with white fabric. It's so much harder than you think. And we have finished the maple and eucalyptus quilt, and you can find that on the link to that on my website. So thank you all for coming today. I should be back with my regular videos starting this week. And then I've got my first Karen's Quilt Circle interview coming up right after that. So I hope to see you online. Karen's Quilt Crew is meeting this weekend, and I hope to see you there. Take care, and I'll see you next time.